My mom thought she could hold my college fund hostage, forcing me to sacrifice my future to tutor my lazy, 24-year-old stepbrother. She thought she had all the power. What she didn't know was that my dad's lawyer was about to uncover a secret in their divorce agreement that would not only free my money, but get her and her entire mooching family evicted from the house they thought was theirs. My mother's attempt to blackmail me with my own college fund wasn't even the most shocking part of the story. The truly mind-blowing revelation was when my father's lawyer exposed the fact that she had been living in his house illegally for years and, consequently, had absolutely no legal right to control my money or my future. My parents' divorce, which happened when I was 8, was surprisingly civilized. My dad is a successful architect, and my mom, who had been a stay-at-home mom throughout their marriage, had to re-enter the workforce as an office administrator. Despite the upheaval, they managed to co-parent without the usual drama over custody or finances. My dad had the foresight to start a college fund for me shortly after I was born, and he diligently contributed to it every year, even after they separated. The fund had grown to about $50,000, not enough to cover 4 years at an Ivy League school, but more than sufficient for the state university I had my heart set on. The family dynamic took a sharp, unpleasant turn when I was 10. My mom married my stepdad, a man who came with his own baggage, namely, a son from a previous marriage. My stepbrother, who is now 24, was 16 at the time of the wedding. And, to put it bluntly, my stepbrother is the dictionary definition of useless. I know that sounds harsh, but it's the unvarnished truth. He dropped out of high school at 16 and has managed to avoid gainful employment ever since. I'm not talking about a career, I'm talking about any job. He's never flipped a burger, bagged a grocery, or done anything that resembles work. His entire existence revolves around playing video games in his room and smoking an impressive amount of weed, all funded by the generosity of his father and my mother. My mom has always been a fixer, a person who feels a compulsive need to solve everyone else's problems, often at my expense. Throughout my childhood, my needs were consistently placed on the back burner. If I needed help with a calculus problem, but my stepbrother was having a meltdown over some perceived slight from one of his equally aimless friends, she would spend hours coddling him while I was left to figure things out on my own. My requests for extracurricular activities that required funding were always met with the excuse that money was tight, yet she would somehow find the resources to buy him the latest gaming console or a pair of ridiculously expensive sneakers. I learned early on to become self-reliant, to not ask for much because the answer would likely be no. It made me independent, I suppose, but it also created a chasm between us. Our relationship has always felt more like that of a concerned neighbor and a self-sufficient child than a traditional mother-daughter bond. Fast forward to the present. I'm 18, a recent high school graduate with an acceptance letter to the state university. I was ecstatic, counting down the days until I could finally escape the toxic environment of my home and begin my own life. I had been working a part-time job since I was 16, diligently saving money for books, dorm supplies, and all the other incidental expenses of college life. My dad and I had meticulously gone through all the financial aid applications and college fund paperwork back in February, and everything was perfectly in order for the fall semester. Then, last week, my mom called a family meeting. This was an immediate red flag. We don't do family meetings. The presence of my stepdad and stepbrother only amplified my suspicion. My mom launched into a long, rambling preamble about the importance of family, about how we all need to support each other's dreams and successes. I sat there, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She then transitioned to the topic of my stepbrother's future, or rather, his lack thereof. She spoke of his struggle to find direction, a delicate euphemism for the fact that he had spent the last 8 years of his life doing absolutely nothing. Then came the bombshell. She proposed that it would be a wonderful thing for our family if I were to postpone my own college plans for a year or 2. The purpose of this sacrifice? To tutor my stepbrother, help him get his GED, and prepare him to eventually apply to college himself. I genuinely thought she was joking. I looked at her, expecting a punchline, but her expression was one of deadly seriousness. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice incredulous. "I start classes in 6 weeks." She continued, undeterred, launching into a sales pitch about how my stepbrother learns best with one-on-one instruction, how this would be a fantastic bonding experience for us, and how my intelligence and ability to explain complex subjects could be the key to unlocking his untapped potential. And then, the part that confirmed her complete detachment from reality, she informed me that she would be holding my college fund in reserve. She would not release the money until my stepbrother had caught up to me academically so that we could, in her words, start our educational journeys together. As if we were 5-year-olds starting kindergarten. My stepdad nodded along in solemn agreement, as if this were the most reasonable proposal in the world. My stepbrother, the subject of this entire ludicrous conversation, didn't even bother to look up from his phone. I told her, in no uncertain terms, that her plan was not going to happen. I reminded her of the years of planning, the enrollment, the commitments I had already made. I was not going to derail my entire life for someone who couldn't even be bothered to finish the 10th grade. My stepbrother finally deigned to look up from his screen. "Wow. Thanks for the support," he muttered sarcastically. That was the final straw. "You want support?" I shot back, my voice rising with years of pent-up frustration. "You have been living in this house, rent-free, for 8 years. Your dad and my mom have paid for every single thing you've ever wanted. You've never had a job. You don't lift a finger to help around the house. You contribute nothing to this family but drama and expenses. So, no, I will not be sacrificing my future so that you can finally be bothered to do the bare minimum that most people accomplish as teenagers." The argument escalated from there. My mom accused me of being cruel, insisting that my stepbrother was struggling with motivation issues and depression.
Fine, I retorted.
Then he can get therapy and work through his issues like every other adult on the planet. I am not his mother, I am not his therapist, and I am certainly not postponing my education to fix his life. My stepdad chimed in, calling me ungrateful, while my mom started crying about how all she wanted was for everyone to succeed. My stepbrother, having contributed his single sarcastic comment, retreated to his room, his part in the drama about his own life apparently concluded. The first thing I did after the fight was call my dad. I recounted the entire insane conversation, and he was silent for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and hard.
"She can't do that," he said.
"What do you mean?" I asked. "She has control of the fund." "Actually," he replied, "no, she doesn't. Not anymore." As it turns out, the moment I turned 18, legal control of the college fund had automatically transferred to me. My mother's role as custodian had expired. She had no legal authority to withhold that money from me. But that didn't stop her from acting as if she did. She spent the next few days in a state of delusional planning, talking about creating a curriculum for my stepbrother's tutoring, buying a stack of GED prep books, and converting our dining room into a dedicated study space. My stepdad kept making cheerful comments about how wonderful it would be when his son was finally an educated, contributing member of society.
My dad,
however, was furious. He told me in no uncertain terms that he had not saved money for 18 years just so my mother could use it as a bargaining chip to salvage her stepson's wasted life. He informed me that he was calling his lawyer on Monday morning to ensure that my mother could not, and would not, interfere with my college plans in any way. I was torn. A part of me felt guilty, seeing my mom so convinced that this insane plan was the key to our family's happiness. But another, larger part of me recognized this for what it was. The culmination of a lifetime of her prioritizing everyone else's needs above mine. And honestly, I didn't even think my stepbrother wanted to go to college. It was just another scheme my mom and stepdad had concocted to make themselves feel like they hadn't completely failed as parents. I couldn't bring myself to sacrifice my future for their delusion. Update. The past week has been a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and explosive revelations that have completely upended my family. As promised, my dad called his lawyer first thing Monday morning. And he didn't just ask about the college fund. Fueled by a righteous anger I had rarely seen in him, he instructed his lawyer to conduct a thorough review of the entire divorce settlement to see if there were any other areas where my mother might be overstepping her bounds. And that's when the real bombshell dropped. My mother has been living in my father's house this entire time. The house I grew up in, the house I had always assumed was hers, is, in fact, still legally his property. The terms of their divorce agreement stipulated that she was allowed to reside in the house, rent-free, until I either turned 18 or graduated from high school, whichever came later. The purpose of this arrangement was to provide me with a stable living environment. The agreement also contained a clause stating that if she were to remarry, she would forfeit her right to live in the house. My dad, in an act of generosity and a desire to not disrupt my life, had never enforced that clause. My dad's lawyer promptly drafted and sent a cease and desist letter to my mother. The letter demanded that she immediately relinquish any and all access to my college fund. It also formally informed her that her custodial housing period, as per the divorce agreement, was now over, and she had 30 days to vacate the property. My mom's reaction was predictable. She called me, hysterical, sobbing about how my dad was trying to make her and her family homeless, how I was a monster for letting him do this. "Mom," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy, "you tried to steal my college money to pay for your stepson's life. What did you think was going to happen?" She insisted she wasn't stealing it, merely holding it for the good of the family, a distinction that was laughable in its dishonesty. The real fireworks started when my stepdad came home from work and learned about the eviction notice. As it turns out, my mother had been lying to him for the entirety of their marriage. She had led him to believe that she had received the house in the divorce settlement. So, not only was he discovering that they were about to be homeless, but he was also learning that his wife was a liar who had deceived him about her financial situation from the very beginning. The ensuing screaming match was of epic proportions. He yelled about how he never would have married her if he knew she was broke and had no assets. She cried about how she thought my dad would never actually kick them out. My stepbrother, drawn from his digital hibernation by the commotion, had a complete meltdown of his own. How was he supposed to focus on his GED, he wailed, if his stable living environment was being destroyed? "Dude," I snapped, my patience completely gone. "You've had 8 years to get your GED. You chose to play video games instead. This is not anyone's fault but your own." My dad came over a few days later to help me with some college paperwork, and my mom tried to ambush him, begging him to let them stay. He remained calm and firm, reminding her that he had already given her 8 years more than the agreement required. My stepdad, who had been lurking in the hallway, then stormed out, yelling at my dad, calling him a vindictive ex-husband trying to destroy their family. My dad just looked at him with a cool disdain. "You have been living in my house, rent-free, for 8 years, while your son contributed nothing but an electricity bill. Perhaps you should try showing a little gratitude instead of entitlement." It was a moment of pure, unadulterated pride in my father. He was finally done letting them walk all over him. So now, my mom and stepdad are in a frantic scramble to find a new place to live, a task made difficult by their limited income and my stepdad's sudden discovery of their true financial state. My stepbrother is reportedly having daily panic attacks at the prospect of facing the real world. My mom continues to try to guilt-trip me, but her words have lost their power. She made her choices. She chose her new family over me, time and time again. She chose to lie to her husband. She chose to try to steal my future. These are simply the consequences. My dad and I have finalized my college enrollment, and he is moving forward with selling the house. He plans to use a portion of the profits to set up an additional, ironclad trust fund for me, one that my mother can never, under any circumstances, touch. I'm finally, truly free of them, and I've never been more excited to start my actual life. Update 2. It's been about 4 months since my last update, and the drama has continued to unfold in ways I never could have predicted. My mom and stepdad were forced to move out of my dad's house at the end of September. Their search for a new home ended with them renting a tiny, 2-bedroom apartment about a 40-minute drive from my university. My stepbrother, naturally, went with them, his reign of terror now confined to the living room couch, which also serves as his bed. The apartment is laughably small. My stepbrother's extensive gaming setup is crammed into a corner of the living room, and he complains incessantly about the lack of space. My stepdad was not handling the significant downgrade in their living situation with any semblance of grace. He constantly made snide remarks about going from a spacious 3-bedroom house to a hovel, always making sure to remind my mom that it was her fault for not securing more assets in her divorce from my dad. For the first time in their marriage, he was actually contributing to the rent, a financial burden that consumed most of his meager paycheck from his retail job. To make ends meet, my mom had to take on a second job, waitressing on weekends. She was perpetually exhausted, stressed, and her new favorite topic of conversation was their dire financial straits. The real poison in their relationship, however, was my stepdad's resentment over my mom's financial deception. He began to openly accuse her of misrepresenting herself, of tricking him into a marriage under false pretenses. "I thought I was marrying a woman who owned her own home," he would say. "If I had known you were this broke, I never would have proposed." My stepbrother, meanwhile, had become a monster of ingratitude. Instead of even pretending to look for a job, he just complained. His life was ruined, the environment was too stressful for him to better himself, and it was all my mother's fault. He even had the audacity to suggest that if she had just successfully stolen my college fund for him, instead of getting caught, he could have moved out and started his own life by now. In the midst of all this chaos, my dad sold the house for well over the asking price. He bought a smaller place for himself and, true to his word, used a significant portion of the profit to establish the new trust fund for me. He also increased my monthly allowance for college expenses, a gesture of support that has allowed me to focus completely on my studies. My relationship with my mother has deteriorated to the point of near non-existence. She views me as the catalyst for her life's implosion. When I moved into my dorm in January, it was the best decision I could have made. I'm excelling in my classes, I've made wonderful friends, and I am blessedly free from the suffocating drama of her life. My stepbrother, to no one's surprise, has made zero progress on his GED. The prep books my mother bought him remain unopened, monuments to her failed project of salvaging his life. I believe my mom is finally starting to see the futility of her efforts, but instead of accepting her role in creating the monster he has become, she prefers to cast blame on everyone else. Update 3. I truly thought the well of my family's drama had run dry, but I was wrong. Last month, my stepdad filed for divorce from my mom. It seems that 6 months of financial reality and cramped living quarters was all it took for him to abandon the marriage he apparently entered into under false pretenses. My mom is devastated. She's been calling me constantly, crying about how he's abandoning her in her time of need. And while he is a spineless opportunist, I can't say I blame him for being upset about her years of deception. The most disgusting development, however, has come from my stepbrother. He has completely turned on my mother, the one person who is willing to sacrifice everything for him. He now blames her for his lack of an education, screaming at her that she should have just stolen my college money outright instead of concocting the tutoring scheme. He accuses her of being too weak to stand up to my dad, of failing to secure the financial resources the family needed. He has called her a failure as a stepmother, a woman who couldn't even provide him with basic stability. The irony of these accusations, coming from a man who has never worked a day in his life, is apparently lost on him. My stepdad moved out 2 weeks ago, and he took everything he considered his, which it turns out was most of the furniture and household items. My mom is now working 3 jobs, her office job, the weekend waitressing gig, and a new evening cleaning job, just to afford the rent on the tiny apartment by herself. She had to sell her car and now relies on the bus and the charity of coworkers for transportation. She looks like a ghost of her former self, gaunt and gray with stress. And my stepbrother is still there, still unemployed, still playing video games, still complaining about how everyone else has ruined his life. She finally apologized to me last week, a tearful, rambling confession over the phone. She admitted she was wrong, that she was sorry for prioritizing him over me. She said that watching him berate her while she works herself to death for his benefit has finally opened her eyes to the fact that some people simply don't want to be saved. I'm not ready to forgive her, but it was a start. My dad has offered to help her find a more affordable place to live, but her pride won't let her accept his help. I'm finishing my freshman year, and I'm doing incredibly well. It's a surreal feeling to think that just a year ago, my own mother was willing to throw all of this away for the sake of a boy who has now become her tormentor. Update 4. I thought the saga had reached its tragic conclusion, but my family's capacity for dysfunction, it seems, is boundless. My stepbrother has now committed felony fraud, and my mother's life is, for all intents and purposes, completely and utterly destroyed. A few weeks ago, my mom called me, her voice a hysterical, unintelligible torrent of sobs. It took me several minutes to piece together what had happened. My stepbrother had stolen her credit cards and racked up over $15,000 in debt before disappearing. He had been secretly ordering thousands of dollars worth of gaming equipment and designer clothes, having the packages delivered to his friends' houses to avoid detection. He had used her cards to fund a life of leisure, taking Ubers everywhere, eating out, all while my mother worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over his head. She only discovered the fraud when her card was declined at the grocery store. By the time she had pieced together the horrifying truth, he was gone. He had simply vanished, taking whatever he could carry and leaving her to face the financial ruin he had created. She had to file a police report against her own stepson, an act of humiliation and heartbreak that is difficult to fathom. The credit card companies are holding her responsible for the majority of the debt. She now has $15,000 of fraudulent debt, has been forced to move into an even smaller, cheaper studio apartment, and has filed for bankruptcy. My dad has been helping her where he can, giving her rides, but he has refused to give her money, believing, and I think correctly, that she needs to finally learn to be financially independent. There is a small, grim postscript to my stepbrother's story. We learned that he was arrested in another state a few months ago for, you guessed it, credit card fraud. He served 8 months in jail and has since been released. He has made no attempt to contact my mother or pay back any of the money he stole. My former stepdad has remarried and pretends that my mother and his son never existed. And so, the story ends. My mother's life is in ruins, a direct consequence of her own choices, her own blindness, her own desperate need to fix a person who is determined to be broken. I feel a sort of distant pity for her, but I also feel an immense sense of relief that I am no longer entangled in her tragic, self-inflicted drama. College is everything I hoped it would be. And sometimes, in the quiet of my dorm room, I wonder what my life would be like now if I had given in, if I had sacrificed my future for him. I imagine he would have learned nothing, wasted 2 years of my life, and then, inevitably, he would have stolen from me, too. In the end, I was lucky. I was the one who got away.